In this function, we're talking about how to call a function that's defined in a local file rather than a standard library. So we've been talking about functions, and last time we reviewed how to call functions that are part of a standard library and also how to import non-standard libraries that are included in Python. Today we're going to learn about how to import functions that are written in a local external file rather than part of a library that's provided by Python. So just like we can use functions that are part of a library, we can also use functions that are provided in a local file. For example, if you had a friend or your one-time instructor wrote a function to do something useful and you wanted to use that function in your Python program, but you didn't want to have to retype all of the code yourself, then you could utilize this particular technique to import that function into your code and gain access to it. This would happen because the code would probably not be used frequently enough to be included in the worldwide Python library, but it might still be convenient for something that you were working on. So for example, if Dr. Annawalt wrote a function to test the validity of a credit card type, wouldn't you want to use her function instead of having to write your own? It would save you like a whole lot of time and effort. If you want to use a function that's written in a local file, you have to follow a few steps. First, you have to have access to the file where the function's defined. You just store that file on your computer in the same spot that you store other Python programs. Then once you have the file, you're able to import the function into your Python program using that familiar import syntax that we've been learning about. And then finally, you have to call the function using appropriate arguments and storing the return value if there is one. So this first step there is to gain access to the file. So whoever wrote the function has to share it with you. If it's a function that you wrote yourself, you could store it in a file. Or again, if it's a function that's written by your instructor or a friend, you would have to have access to their file. So they'd have to send you a copy of that, and you'd have to store it on your computer. The next step is to import the function into your program. And to do that, you say from, and then provide the file name, the name of the file where you stored it, and then import, and then the name of the function. So if Dr. Annawalt had a function that was stored inside a file on your computer called creditcardlibrary.py, and if her function was named isCardTypeValid, and it was set up to take one parameter, the card type, and then it returned a true or false value based on whether or not that card was valid. What would the Python code look like to import that function into a program that you were writing? Think about that for a second. Using this import syntax, what do you think that would look like? So the import statement would be from, and then credit card library, because that's the name of her file. Notice that when you include the file name in the from statement, you don't include the .py extension. Just put the name of the file that comes before that. So credit card library in this example. Then you say import and then list all of the function names. So her function was called isCardTypeValid. That's the name of the function that you would include here after the import statement. And if you had multiple files that you wanted to include, you would just put a comma and then the name of the next function. Maybe there's also a function that checks to see if the card number is valid. And you could include that as a second function that you wanted to import into your program. So suppose that you wanted to that you have a credit card type stored in a variable called card type. How would you call that function after you had imported it into your code? The function call would look just like a regular function call in your program. So you'd say, is card type valid? That's the name of the function. Then you'd provide arguments. So in this case, your argument is the card type, because we know that the isCardTypeValid function is set up to take one parameter that represents the card type that should be tested. So that's stored in this variable card type in your program. And then this particular function returns a true or false value, so we have to save that somewhere. I'm calling that result. So the full function call looks like result equals is card type valid, and then taking the card type as an argument. So if you wanted to use the function in a program, it might look something like this. This would be like the program that you wrote. You'd say, I want to use the credit card library that Dr. Annawalt wrote, and I have that stored in a file called creditcardlibrary.py on my computer. And I want to use her function called isCardTypeValid. Then you'd have to write all of the code to make that possible using that function. So you'd have to find out what card type the user wants to test. Then you would have to add the code to call the function isCardTypeValid and store the result. And then in your program, you could check to see if the result was true or the result was false, and write a statement indicating which one was the case. So I wrote all of this in a Python program just to show you what it would look like. So again, here's the code we just talked about, where I'm importing from a local file, creditcardlibrary.py, and I'm going to use the function isCardTypeValid. I wrote all of my program's instructions in there, and then I could run this to test it out. It'll ask me for a card type. I can type in a card type, and then it'll tell me if that card type is valid. Again, this has a lot of benefits. If somebody has a method or a function that's useful to you, you don't have to rewrite all of those instructions that test to see if the card type's valid. You just get to utilize their code in your own program to save some time and effort.